Okay, so welcome again. Welcome to this webinar, Publish Your Own Story, Key Tips for Successfully Publishing a Storybook from Scratch. Key things, we're going to be recording this webinar, and you can also ask questions, towards the end. So just note down your questions as we start. Doing this, making mobile apps and storybooks for kids. We're based in Lagos, Nigeria. This is, you can see on the screen, that's my website for Genie Games, and this is one for IllustrApps, where we help independent authors and organizations bring their ideas to life. Story, yeah. So a bit of overview before we get started. Some of you may be wondering why I'm doing this, so here goes. Like some of you, I started out as a passionate creative who wanted to make stories and games for my nieces to learn about native cultures. Like some of you, I thought it was overwhelming. I thought it was hard. I thought it was expensive. And I actually thought it was something meant for professionals. Fast forward to today, with over a dozen apps on the store. And, I still get the same questions from people. So questions like, how did I get started? What's the process involved? Whose expertise is required? What's the approach to saving costs? Where can one start from? Those are the questions that we're going to be answering with this webinar. So yeah, a quick one also is, why publish your own storybook? In my opinion, it's easy. It's a way to it's a way to create a brand. It's a way to convey your story to a diverse audience, and anyone can do it. So why publish a storybook? Like I mentioned, it's easy. It's a way to create a brand. It's a way to convey your story to a diverse audience, and anyone can do it. In terms of the benefits, it offers you extra income. It offers you a way to expand your brand. It's also a way to convey your story to a new and diverse set of audience. And then, it also offers you same content with different outputs. I'm still going to revisit this topic. So no, I'm sorry, this point, so note it. So it offers you same content for different outputs. And then you get 100% ownership of your intellectual property, which is, copyright and then, trademark. But first things first, you need to publish your own storybook, hence this webinar. So, from experience, it helps to understand the process that goes into creating the basic storybook. One benefit of that is you can then decide how, where, and what's required to, to get started. So the first thing that we'll walk through is the scripting. Basically, think of this as, your idea for the story. It doesn't have to be perfect. One way to go about that is you just write down a set of objectives that you want your reader to acquire after reading the story. And then you can walk back, or build a story around those objectives. Now, those objectives can end up becoming your why, your selling point for the story when it comes to things like marketing. So the next thing that you then do is you flesh out the story into scenes or pages. So the end result should be, a page-by-page description of the narration or conversation, just line by line. One thing that you also want to establish at this point is, a main character or main characters, usually one or two of them. So you ensure you pick out at least one notable character or two of them that will be the face of your brand or story. In terms of fleshing out the story also, you may want to, if you're doing it yourself, you may want to use a service called Grammarly. Grammarly is a website where you can actually proofread your, the things that you've written. So it looks out for things like typos, it's free. So you can check out Grammarly, or you can actually employ, the help of a professional writer or editor. Now, the second phase in the process is character development. So this is building on what I talked about in the scripting phase, which is, you identifying one central character or one or two main characters. That's what I've seen people do in most cases. So for the character development, you need the service of an illustrator. Now, note here that an illustrator is different from a graphic designer. An illustrator can bring an idea to life by drawing them. A graphic designer usually just designs things like a logo, and stuff like that. So for character development, you also want to take note of certain things. You want to take note of things like a name, the age. You want to give your character a name, age, the sex, the likes, dislikes. You just treat your character like a real, like a human being, like a real, even it's an animal that you're using as a central character, make it as, you know, as real as you can, because that's what helps the illustrator, you know, in bringing that character to life. So you note that at this point. One other thing you want to note at this point is, you know, you also want to note the style that is used in coloring the character. So at this point, the illustrator will give you like different, with about, say, maybe 3 samples. And so you want to note the shades of colors, because that's what will be consistent going forward. So you want to note that. The next phase is storyboarding. So think of the storyboard as a visual representation of your script. Think of it, I call it the blueprint, because what you have in your storyboard is what will be used for the actual scene itself, you know, when it comes to coloring and illustrating the scene proper. So, you know, again, it involves the service of an illustrator. Things to look out for, you know, at the storyboard phase, you want to look out for the camera positions. So if you look at the storyboard I have on screen, you can see in some, so if you look at the, sixth one, for example, you can see that the characters, just 2 of them, are actually closer to you in a sense. So that's what I call camera positions. You want to look out for those kinds of things, because what you have here, like I mentioned, is what the illustrator will carry on, you know, with going forward. So you look out for that. At this point, you also want to make corrections. So this is the point where you make corrections. I mean, if you don't like how the characters are represented in terms of the camera angles, you know, you take note of that at this point. You also want to make your own inputs. And remember what, you know, what it said about, you know, a picture, you know, saying 1,000 words or speaking 1,000 words. So if what you have here does not directly, you know, represent the volume of text that you have for each scene, you also want to make a correction at this point. So this is very critical for you. The storyboard phase is where you make corrections, you know, you ask questions, get the opinions of others if you have to, because it's important. And that leads us to the next phase. The next phase is the illustration and coloring phase. So this is, you know, this is another important phase, but this is basically just building on what you on the previous one, which is the storyboarding phase. And so if you look at what we have here, this is an example of one of my works, or one of our works. You can see, you know, a representation of what you have in the storyboard, you know, in colors. You also have the same thing for, you know, the second scene there. So here, the illustrator basically just draws out what you have, you know, as clean as possible, and then, you know, painting on it. So that's important also. Yeah, so the 5th major phase is the publishing phase. And when it comes to publishing, you can select from multiple options or formats. You can decide which one to go for based on your target audience, your goals, and available resources. Now, while we, you know, so I'll just walk you through, you know, the 4 different formats that I have here. So the first one is the print. Print is your traditional book. Now you can, so for print, you can decide to print in bulk and then stock. So you get a printer of your own, you get a printer, you know, of your choice. They print out your books, you know, the number of copies you want. Usually, you know, the cheaper the cost, you know. So you have that, and then you get to do the distribution yourself. So maybe to bookstores in your locality or across the world. But another option that you have for your print book is called print on demand, POD. Print on demand is such that you don't have to print out or stock anything. So most of the books that you, or some of the books that you see on Amazon are actually using that service. So Amazon has a print on demand service where, you know, you upload your manuscript, which is, I mean, everything that the illustrator has done, and, you know, the drawings, the text and everything, you upload everything online. It's free. And then, you know, when a customer makes a purchase, Amazon will then send that manuscript to a printer. You know, but here's the thing to take note of. The downside to this is Amazon will walk you through a base price. So in my own experience, for example, I have a book that is selling for about 15, let me see here. Yeah, so I have this book. Hold on. Yeah, so I have this book that sells for, so this is the paperback. it sells for $14.99, and my profit from this is about $5 because Amazon will factor in its royalty. Amazon will factor in the cost of getting it to a printer, and also factor in taxes. So that's the downside to print on demand, but then you don't have to stock up on anything. And you can check out other ones. So Amazon is not the only one. We have CreateSpace also. When it comes to electronic books, you start to look at, that's where you hear about formats like Mobi, you hear about EPUB, and of course, most of us know PDF. For electronic books, you're not printing out anything. You're just making them available for people to download, to their Kindles, or using, apps like Apple iBooks. Now, for electronic books and print books, you can have them on Amazon, for example, for free. You don't have to pay anything. You just you can walk through it yourself and put in your stuff on Amazon as electronic and print books using the print on demand service like I talked about. For the electronic books also, you can actually make the price point, anything you want. You can even offer them for free. In my own case, I'm actually offering the Kindle version for $9.99. But the beauty also for both allows you, so when you're setting it up, you can set both of them up in one page. So when a user goes in search of your book, they can see the Kindle version, which they can get at a cheaper cost or for free. If you want to make them available for free, they can also see the paperback version. So in my own case, even though it's a paperback version, nothing has been printed out yet until a customer makes the purchase. That's when Amazon handles everything. So I hope that's noted. For mobile apps, for mobile apps, there's going to be a bit of a modification, and I explain as follows. Apple, for example, does not allow for you to just take a static storybook and just make it into an app. For them, it's better suited as an iBook, as an electronic book for people to read. If you want it to be available as an app, then Apple usually requires that you have a bit of interactivity to that story. So slight modifications could be things like adding like a coloring page, which is an activity page for. It can actually be things like, putting in place elements, simple quizzes or games, adding voiceover so that there's a narration that plays, and for this, you'd need the service of a computer programmer. But then your app can be available on Apple Store, on Google Play, on Amazon App Store. The last publishing format I have for you here is, animation or cartoon videos. So the same assets can be used as cartoon videos. And when it comes to cartoon videos or animation, you have, different choices, and you have different options rather. We'll get to that in a bit. It can be as simple as a static page, with voiceover or text or moving figures, but for these also you'd need, the service of an animator. So in general, the choice of publishing format should be guided by your audience, by your target audience, the resources you have available. And also note that for some of these things like the mobile app or animation, you would incur, extra cost on your part because you're bringing in, extra hands, a programmer, an animator. But I must also note again that electronic book, you may not, you can set up on Amazon for free without paying any, without paying any upfront cost. Another thing that I want you to also note at this point is that your assets are reusable, but with varying degrees of modification depending on the publishing option you have. So like I mentioned, if you pick what your illustrator has done, you can decide to, set up on, Amazon as, as an electronic book, also as a print book, without, incurring any extra cost. But if you want to go the route of mobile apps or animation, you incur extra cost. But note that, because the assets are reusable, your costs are already, you're not going to have as much to cover as you did spend on the storybook itself, but it also depends on the scope, and we'll get there also. So the next phase is, or the next thing that I would like us to look at is factors affecting pricing. So just a bit of a recap again, we touched on 5 different phases, in getting your book illustrated and then published. So right now, let's look at, the factors affecting pricing. a key component or a key phase in the five phases that I described earlier is illustration. And for illustration, you know, the two factors that you should be aware of are the coloring styles and the number of pages. Now, coloring style, I have illustrated with, you know, 3 examples. The first one on the left, you know, is a flat color, and so it's basically like one color for each of the characters. You know, the second one is 2 tones, and the flat colored one is usually the cheapest. Then you have the next one, which is called 2 tones. For 2 tones, if you take note of it, you will find, so for example, on the cloth that the lady is putting on, you can find like you can see like a shadow. You can see like a highlight. So you have like 2 tones. So you have one color and then you have highlights for things maybe like a shadow, or just to emphasize certain areas or certain parts of her body. And then the third one is, you know, detailed. Detailed is, of course, pricier than the other two, the other two that I just described. And you can see that this one, the coloring style is a lot more detailed. So, so that's one key factor when it comes to pricing for illustration. It's, you know, and then another is the number of pages you're illustrating. As with printing also, the number of the higher the number of pages, the better. But it's usually like a base number, you know, because I mean relatively the same amount of energy or resources will go into illustrating. If you're illustrating 2 pages, you know, it'll almost be like the same amount for illustrating like 5 pages. So, you know, the more the better. And then illustrators like to place like a cap on the number of pages that they're working on, so that it's also it also makes business sense for them. When it comes to excuse me, when it comes to mobile apps, so the key factor affecting mobile apps is actually the scope. And, you know, in terms of the scope, and so by the scope I mean what exactly are we going to be working with? Because you can go as far as you can go as deep as you want when it comes to these mobile apps. You can decide on the number of interactive elements that you want. You can decide that every page will have an activity for your user, you know, to play around. It could be that you can touch something and something will pop up, you know. So that's what I mean by interactive elements. You should, in terms of the scope, also there's also what platform you're building your mobile app for. Is it Android only? Is it iOS only? Or is it for both of them? Is it Android or iOS? Or are you also going to be including Windows, also Windows platform? So that's also important. Another thing also is, you know, even for iOS, are you developing for iPhones only? Or are you developing for iPads only? Or are you developing for both of them? Are you also going to be doing, you know, are you also making the content available offline so that when users download, they don't have to connect to the internet, you know, again, for anything? Or are you making it both? Are you also looking at multilingual support? Do you want to make sure, do you want to make your apps to people in multiple languages, so it's not just English? Do you want voiceover, in which case you want narration, you know, for each page? So I mean, all of this make up, you know, what the scope will be, and that scope is what determines the pricing, you know, for mobile apps. And then the last one is, and also one thing that I forgot to mention, sorry, when it comes to illustration, it's priced per unit, so like per page, you know, how many. So when you're getting a costing for that, is usually, okay, illustration for a page is, you know, easily multiply that to get the total amount. But like I mentioned also, the more the pages, you know, the easier it is to bargain for, you know, a cheaper cost per page. For mobile apps, it's usually a bulk fee, which is, you know, the cost of programming. But if you're looking at things like the voiceover, you know, those are unit costs also, because you look at how many voiceover artists do you want, you know, in what languages do you want them to, you know, to make your story available, also, in which case you're looking at how many number of translators are going to be involved, you know, and things. For animation, 2 things also. One is the length rather Also, length is a key thing, and length is usually measured in seconds. So if you want a 1 minute animation, then you're looking at 60 seconds. And the longer, the more expensive. Also, when it comes to animation, the longer, the more expensive. And then, but then another thing I should mention is if you actually work on one, your assets can be reusable for subsequent ones also. If you're doing like a standard animation, and I'll show you an example, you may not need to. So if you have characters that have been animated for one scene or one story, for one episode, you can act, if you have a sequel, for example, then you can have the same character reused for a second one without having to reanimate. So that forces down the pricing also. Then another thing is the style. We have different styles of animation, and I'll walk you through some examples here. So this is what I meant by a basic animation, or this is what I mean by a basic animation rather. So just watch. So you see simple eye movements. You don't see anybody moving around. It's just eye movements, mouth movements. That's a basic animation there. The standard animation would be, get this thing out. Sorry. So a standard animation would be something like this. Yeah, so there's all those movements, but this is also two-dimensional. This is 2D, this is flat. That's something to take note of. So full movement, this one is also flat. You can see the coloring style is flat, or two-dimensional. So that's something to take note of. Is a basic one where you just have eye movements, mouth movements. There's nobody walking from point A to point B. It's not complex. This is another one. This is a bit more complex, but this is also flat in terms of its style, 2D coloring style. And then the last one is a 3D animation. So this one is a lot more detailed. As you can see here, this is one of our works. This is a lot more detailed, as you can see. Yeah, so this is pricier, but this one involves movement also. So I'll just go back to the slide. So here's what I just described: the basic 2D animation. The first one you watch, which is basic eye, movements. The background is static. There's nothing really. There's no movement really besides the mouth and the eyes for the characters. For the standard 2D animation, it's a 2D coloring style. You can have animated backgrounds, you can have body movements, characters can jump and run and things like that. And then you have the 3D, which is the last one that I showed you, very detailed also, in terms of the coloring style. So those are three major animation styles. And of course, 3D is way more expensive than, two of them. Yes, so basic 2D is relatively cheap to do. Standard 2D more expensive than than the basic 2D, and then 3D is is more expensive than both of them. And for this one, like I mentioned, the service of an animator will be required. Yeah. So the next thing that I also want to go into is, so what's the approach? What approach can you take when it comes to publishing your storybook? What's the best way to go about saving on cost and managing resources? From experience, here's what I know. You can actually break down the whole process, or the implementation, into phases. And so, for example, you can start with having your script, which is, of course, it's important to have the idea and that script fleshed out, and then have your characters done, your central characters, even if it's one or two, because with those you can begin to do things like marketing. You can begin to promote your works to your audience and get feedback from them. That into then illustrating the book proper, so the illustration and coloring of pages. You could then decide, oh, okay, maybe do a basic 2D animation. So you can pick like one scene in your story and have that basic 2D animation where your character comes to life, with mouth movements, with the eyes. And if you decide to, you can actually have voiceover, or you can just have background music playing. This is actually very good for promotional purposes. So you can just take that and put on Instagram or YouTube, and then you can go from there to maybe the mobile app, to standard animation. The choice is really yours though, but you can break this thing down in phases. And I've seen this happen with the number of people, they usually start with the character development. They can have a logos, go along with it, and they can start promoting that. So that way you can save on resources, you can get valuable feedback, as you walk through the process. So that's one way that I would advise that, people go through this to save on cost and manage available resources. Yeah. So now I'd like to talk about the things that I think you should know before starting. And one of these is for you to have lots of references. And by references, what works do you like? No idea is original. So, whose work is out there that you love what they are doing, that you love their coloring style and things like that. The more, the better, because that helps, the illustrator or the designer, whoever it is you're working with, it helps. So more references, the better. Another thing is you need to have a clear idea about the publishing platform and format of your choice. Hold on. Okay, so you need to have a clear idea of the publishing platform and format of choice. An example is if you're looking to use Amazon's print-on-demand service for your book, then you need to be aware of specific specifications that Amazon gives. So Amazon has a manual, and I can share with you where it has sizes that your book needs to conform to. So if you're talking to an illustrator, you have to make them aware of the fact that, you're going to be publishing on Amazon's print on demand, and they have these specifications for their books, and they need to adhere to that. So that's very important. You need to be aware of the publishing platform and format of choice, because they have specifications. Another thing that I would advise is that you share your vision, your big picture with the illustrator or writer or programmer or animator, whoever it is you're going to be working with. Even if you're starting with one format or one platform, share your vision or the big picture with them, because that's the best way that it can help you develop assets in ways that they become reusable and save you on extra cost when it comes to subsequent related works. And let me explain that again. If for example, I know that you're going to be working, if for example, I know that you intend to create an anime, a cartoon video eventually for your story, then the way that I will design your character and from the beginning, we would have that, would take that into consideration, so that when it's time for you to do the animation and you're talking to an animator, you don't necessarily have to redraw your characters. Because when an animator is giving you his or her pricing, the price breakdown usually includes character development, and things like that. So if you share this big picture beforehand with whoever you're working with, they can help you build those assets in such a way that they are reusable going forward. Another thing that I find is the need for you to allow room for feedback and revisions when you have your timeline. So you may already have your timeline for development, for marketing and things like that, but it helps that you factor in feedback and revisions and things like that. So from experience, when people come to us, they'll say, I want this done in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, which not necessarily is a problem for us if it's realistic. But the point is, because at every point, at every phase, we need approval from you, which is very important. It may take some people, quite a number. It can take them a long time to come to a decision, for certain things for us to move forward. So factor in timeline for feedback and revisions. Don't feel a need to rush through approvals, because corrections after approval, typically incur extra costs. So it's not easy to just change some things, and that at the end of the day, time is money, even for the people that you're working with. So that's very important for you. Yeah, so things to know again before starting. When it comes to working with illustrators or whoever it is you're working with, ensure your agreement includes your ownership of the intellectual property. Ensure it's well spelled out explicitly. By intellectual property, I mean copyright and trademark. I must also mention at this point that it is your sole responsibility to do the copyright or trademark. So you have to find a legal representative who's well versed in intellectual property. And when it comes to intellectual properties, what I know from experience is it varies from territory to territory also. So registering, so if I register a trademark in Nigeria, for example, and I wanted to make my products available in the US and trademark, I'll have to also do a trademark in the US. So these are things that you want to find out from your lawyer, or someone who's well versed in intellectual property issues, and they can walk you through those. But ensure that your agreement with your illustrator or programmer or animator has that clearly spelled out. Also, make sure that your agreement spell out clear deliverables. Don't assume any format. Don't assume that. Don't assume that the person who's drawing for you knows that you want it in PDF or so format, because at the end of the day, but when you take your work to a printer, for example, the printer may demand that it be done, that you provide the document in certain formats. Formats like AI, SVG, PNG. Those are things that you need to also take note of. You may also want to make sure that your agreement with your illustrator is flexible. If you don't have foreknowledge of the format, for example, you may want to let them know, so that they put that into consideration when they're designing. And yeah, so that's clear. If you want something like a black and white character, for example, you also need to make that clear from the start. Also, for different publishing platforms, be aware of other costs. So one of these is revenue share. So Amazon's print-on-demand service that I talked about earlier, where you can actually have people buy, a print book without you printing out anything. Amazon will do everything for you. Amazon will usually take, I think it's 70% that they will take from every sale, and then you get 30%. It varies, but you need to be aware of that. So even for mobile apps, so for if you're selling your apps on Google Play, on Apple Store, be aware of revenue shares. So Apple, I know, will take, a mistake. Amazon will take 30% and you will take 70%. The bulk usually goes to you, who's the owner. So even for mobile apps, Apple will take 30%. Apple will take 30% for every sale, while you get 70%. But that's if you're selling the apps. If your products are available for free, you do not pay anything. Nobody gets a cut of anything. But if you're selling, for every sale, every unit, 30%, get 70%. The same thing goes for Google, and I think the same thing goes for Amazon apps also. Also, when it comes to mobile apps, also so there's what we call developer fees. If you're going to be publishing an app on Google Play, you need to pay $25 for a lifetime. Now, you can go two different routes for this. You can decide that whoever is developing that app for you maintains that app on their platform, so that you forgo that cost. But I will not advise this, because if you take ownership of that publishing platform, if you take ownership of if you pay $25 to Google, so for you to be able to publish apps, then you have access to things like, where your users are, useful data really, where your users are coming from, and that can give you an insight, as to where to advertise and things like that. You get lots of, what phones you're using to download, what is their sex, valuable data that can help in terms of your marketing. So I'll advise that, if you're going the route of mobile apps, pay the $25, have the developer help you set up your own account and then manage it yourself. So that works that way. Same thing goes for Apple. But the tricky thing about Apple is, for Google, it's $25 for a lifetime. You pay it once and that's it for a lifetime. You can publish as many apps as you want using that same account. For Apple, you have to keep paying $99.99 every year. So approximately $100 every year. So it's like a rent. So for Apple, you're paying them every year. The year that you fail to pay them, they pull down your apps, or your apps do not become available to your users. But if you're making good sales, I think it's a relatively cheap cost to actually cover. So it's approximately $100 every year. But it's a platform that has a good number of paying users, so it's good for business. So those are key points. It's a bit of recap again. I talked about the process, just walked you through 5 major phases in the development process, and that helps you. I talked about various animation styles, you know, and even illustration styles and how they affect pricing. I talked about, you know, different publishing formats, you know, that you should be aware of going forward. But the key thing that I mentioned that was that, you know, your assets are actually reusable, you know, you know, for the process going forward. And at this point, and then I shared some key points with you in terms of starting out.